Hello. Sorry about the technical difficulty. That's how life is. Sometimes things don't go the way that you want to. We're starting late with our show, but as always on our show, Cultivating the Culture, we start off with our leader, Brother Malcolm, speaking. So here we go.
Nowadays, to learn how to do is see for yourself and listen for yourself and think for yourself, and then you can come to an intelligent decision for yourself. But if you form the habit of going by what you hear others say about someone,
So here we go.
or going by what others think about someone, instead of going and searching that thing out for yourself and seeing for yourself, you will be walking west when you think you're going east. You'll be walking east when you think you're going west. So this generation, especially of our people, have a burden upon themselves more so than at any other time in history. The most important thing we can learn how to do today is think for ourselves. It's good to keep wide open ears and listen to what everybody else has to say. But when you come to make a decision, you have to weigh all of what you heard of its own and place it where it belongs. And then come to a decision for yourself, and you'll never regret it. But if you form the habit of taking what someone else says about a thing without checking it out for yourself, you'll find that other people will have you hating your own friends and loving their enemies.
Welcome back. As always, we start off our show with our brother Malcolm, telling you to be able to think for yourself. And that's one of the things with Cultivating Culture, that we want people to be able to think for themselves, be able to listen to the show, investigate what we have to say, and to be able to make this change this culture. We have a culture that, as we always say, it has to be based on change, and it has to be based on thinking. We have to change our condition that we're in, and it's up to us. It's not up to anybody else. And changing your culture means you have to change your habits. And part of that is thinking for ourselves. We have media that's set up to be able to think for you, tell you how to think, what is good, what is bad, what you should like. And so what we try to do is try to educate you. So today, we had some technical difficulties trying to start. As you see, I'm in a different studio. So we're making the best of what we have. What we were doing, we were going over Martin Luther King's last two speeches. One was a sermon that he did at the National Cathedral, and this was March 31st, 1968. And then another will be the April 3rd. He made a speech in Memphis, Tennessee, and thereafter, a few days later, he was murdered. Last week, they had the holiday. His birthday was actually the 15th. Then they had the holiday, and of course, during that time, you heard a lot of, Martin Luther King speeches. And I was born in '64, so when Martin Luther King was killed, I was 4 years old. And basically, throughout my life, most of what I hear every year is, "I have a dream. I have a dream. I have a dream." Or, "I've seen over the mountain top," or, "We shall overcome." But they really don't play a lot of his speeches that are contrary to what image they want to portray of him. And last year, I put together a poem after listening to Paul Robeson, and learning about his life a little bit more. And I realized what they've done is they've cut off our voices of the past, and they've created the language in the speech and the guidance of our voices of the past. And that's why we're not dealing with the racism or the issue of the past. So what we'll do is, instead of putting it on the screen, we're going to play Martin Luther King's speech that he had at the National Cathedral. We'll play a part of it, pause, and then speak to some of the things that we need to discuss that are relevant today. It's very important. We actually posted it on the Facebook page so everybody can get a chance to listen to it. A lot of people didn't. Most people don't. Most people see something, "Oh, that's nice," they give a like, or they don't give a like. But what we put on our page, what I put on the Facebook or Tariq Ibn Jamil, is not there for show and tell, not there to get likes. It's to be able to educate our people, to be able to pass on the knowledge that we've gained over the years to the others, because it's important for us to be able to educate ourselves and also work on the next generation. If we're not putting in that work, then who is? And I'm asking you again, I'm saying the statement again, if we're not putting in the work, who is? So if we're not, then no one is. Then what's going to be the change? So here we go with our brother Martin Luther King, and this is his sermon.
I need not pause to say how very delighted I am to be here this morning, to have the opportunity of standing in this very great and significant pulpit. And I do want to express my deep personal appreciation to Dean Sayer and all of the cathedral clergy for extending the invitation. It is always a rich and rewarding experience to take a brief break from our day-to-day demands in the struggle for freedom and human dignity and discuss the issues involved in that struggle with concerned friends of goodwill all over our nation. And certainly it is always a deep and meaningful experience to be in a worship service. And so for many reasons, I'm happy to be here today. I would like to use as a subject from which to preach this morning, remaining awake through a great revolution. And the text.
So this sermon that he talks about is remaining awake through a great revolution. And the reason that I said it's important to do it on the show, I listened to it, and we are in that time. We're in another time of revolution. This past year, this year of COVID, this year of change, it's a revolution that has happened. And many people have woken up. Many people are still sleeping. What's going to happen is soon, in a few months, it's going to be over. We're going back to the regular things. Things are changing already. We've had a new change in the president, and now we have a new one, and everybody's feeling a certain way as though things have changed and we're okay, and the revolution is over, and people are going back to what they have, and they'll go back to sleep. So listening to our brother Martin speak inspired me. So I'm going to let him continue, and I'll stop it and talk. And also, one more thing, please give us a call at 9 o'clock. Starting 9 o'clock, 301-429-9247, 301-429-9247. Let our brother Dr. King continue.
The morning is found in the book of Revelation. There are two passages there that I would like to quote. It's in the 16th chapter of that book. Behold, I make all things new. Former things are passed away. I'm sure that most of you have read that arresting little story from the pen of Washington Irving entitled Rip Van Winkle. The one thing that we usually remember about the story is that Rip Van Winkle slept 20 years. But that is another point in that little story that is almost always completely overlooked. It was a sign in the end from which Rip went up in the mountain for his long sleep. When Rip Van Winkle went up in the mountain, The sign had a picture of King George III of England. When he came down 20 years later, the sign had a picture of George Washington, the first president of the United States. And Rip Van Winkle looked up at the picture of George Washington, but in looking at the picture, he was amazed. He was completely lost.
So, in this, he points out two things. One, he talks about Revelation. He said there's a passage in there in the 16th chapter of the book, and it says, "Behold, I make all things new, former things are passed away." And one of the things throughout this, Cultivating the Culture, throughout our shows, we constantly talk about our leaders, Malik Shabazz and Malcolm X, Martin Luther King, Paul Robeson. These individuals, they remembered their faith. Faith is an important thing. And as you see, he's giving a sermon in the church, but he's still talking about the issues of life, the issues of concern, the issues of change, as you will see. And they did not hide their faith. I don't know how we end up getting here. Well, I do know how, but we're here, and we're trying to bring that back so we can restore this type of leadership of going back to faith. So he talked about that passage. He said, "Behold, I make." Revelation says, "Behold, I make all things new. Former things are passed away." And so it's important for us as we coming into this new time that we have to get rid of our old ways. Former things have to pass away. We have to make that change. And then he talks about Rip Van Winkle, and he said when Rip went up into the mountains, there was a king, and he slept for 20 years, and he came back down, and now there was a new president. There was a liberation. There was a revolution. He slept through the revolution, and many people have slept through the revolution. And when he came back down, he saw that there was a change, and that's where we are right now. When he went up, we had somebody in a position that's king, whatever, whether you want to say Donald Trump, he took his position or that position. Now we've come back down, and people are waking back up, and they're seeing that there's a new king or new person, and this person is a president, and we have Biden, and the things have changed. But many people have slept through the revolution. A lot of people that didn't do any work during this change. When we have the racism and the riots and there's all of the struggles that I have, there were people out there during that time of revolution making the change. And there are a lot of people that were sleeping. And what happens is, after we have these revolutions and then we have this change, the ones that were sleeping, the ones that were sitting back because they had a comfortable life, they end up being put forth as the ones that the people are going to start listening to. And the ones that put in that work during this time of revolution, the ones that were on the front line, those are the ones that usually get pushed back away. I want to be able to make sure that we don't sleep through this revolution, and we don't let the ones that were sleeping through the revolution take it over and take over this change.
He knew not who he was. And this reveals to us that the most striking thing about the story of Rip Van Winkle is not merely that Rip slept 20 years, but that he slept through a revolution. While he was peacefully snoring up in the mountain, a revolution was taking place that at points would change the course of history. And Rip knew nothing about it. He was asleep. Yes, he slept through a revolution. One of the great liabilities of life is that all too many people find themselves living amid a great period of social change, and yet they fail to develop the new attitudes, the new mental responses that the new situation demands. They end up sleeping through a revolution.
I'm going to pause on that. And he said one of the great liabilities of life is that all too many people find themselves amid a great period of social change. And that's where we are, a period of social change. When he talked about the 20 years, when you look at it, during the time of Rip Van Winkle, during the time when we're talking about the 1776, the 1700s, late 1700s, you know, what took place in 20 years right now is done maybe in 20 minutes. So, or maybe a year. So that 20-year period was this 1 year that we had with the COVID. This 1 year that we've all been on lockdown. You know, one of the things I remind the brothers when I used to go to the prison and a guy get sent to the hole, and they get sent to the hole in solitary confinement. And I'll go down and visit them, and I would tell them, actually, you're in a better situation because you're away from the population, and now you can be able to focus. You know, and I ask the people, what have you done during this time, this past year that you've been locked down, this time that you're not at the club, that you're not watching the games, you're not doing these things, you're not out and about. Have you worked on that during this time of revolution? Revolution is change. Revolution is not just by the gun. Most of the time, it's not done by that. That's not the real permanent change. The permanent change is the change that must occur from ourselves. And I asked people this past year, while you were in solitary confinement, while you were locked down, you know, what change has happened? And or were we just sleeping? Or are we going to come back as though we were sleeping? But like he said, he finds that amid a great period of social change, yet the people failed to develop the new attitudes. Have we developed new attitudes? A new attitude we should have a different attitude from last year. The things that we did not know, the things that were hidden before, the things that we're blind to, we should have a new attitude of being involved in this revolution, making that change. He said, and the new mental responses, the situation demands. You know, this new situation that we're coming into, once we come out of this COVID situation, once we come out of this lockdown, being on lockdown and get back in the general population, we have to be able to have changed and prepared ourselves for this new situation. What have we done? What changes have we made in the past year? And are we ready? Are we still sleeping during this revolution? Or are we going to wake up before it's over, and then those that were sleeping will be back in charge again?
There can be no gainsaying of the fact that the great revolution has taken place in the world today. In the sense it is a triple revolution. That is a technological revolution with the impact of automation and cybernation. Then that is a revolution in weaponry with the emergence of atomic and nuclear weapons of warfare. Then that is a human rights revolution with the freedom explosion that has taken place all over the world. Yes, we do live in a period where changes are taking place. And that is still a voice crying through the vista of time, saying, behold, I make all things new. Former things are passed away. Now, whenever anything new comes into history, it brings with it new challenges and new opportunities. And I would like to deal with the challenges that we face today as a result of this triple revolution that is taking place in the world today.
That's a very important statement for right now. I mean, it's beautiful what he said, but he said, now, whenever anything comes into history, it brings with it new challenges and new opportunities. And he said he's going to take a moment to deal with the challenges that they face. And so, like he said, whenever anything comes into history, it brings new challenges and new opportunities. Do you see the new challenges that we have now that are facing us with this change? We've had the supremacy that has been going on, the white supremacy. We've had, police brutality. We've had economic depression. Basically, this is the closest thing that we've had to the depression of 1929 than any other thing that I can see. Many businesses are closed. People are losing their homes. So this is a new situation. These are new challenges. How are we dealing with the challenges? And what changes have we made? And during this time of revolution, during this time of change, have we made the changes ourselves? And then there's going to be new opportunities. Are we looking at those opportunities? Are we preparing ourselves so when this time, this COVID is over, when this time when everybody's back in motion, when this time where everybody's back at full throttle, and then we're behind, because right now we're kind of, or even to a certain extent, except for the super rich who's taking advantage of these economic depression for everybody else, and pushing what they have. But the regular person, we've kind of just on a slow mode. So what are we doing? What changes are we making? And how are we going to be dealing with these challenges? And also how are we going to be dealing with these new opportunities?
First, we are challenged to develop a world perspective. No individual can live alone. No nation can live alone. And anyone who feels that he can live alone is sleeping through a revolution.
And I have to pause on that. Like I said, first we are challenged to develop a world perspective. No individual can live alone. No nation can live alone. And anyone who feels that he can live alone is sleeping through a revolution. So this situation that ever since he died, and prior to that, they started really pushing this singular individual. You had the Jackson 5 went from the Jackson 5 to Michael Jackson. You had the Supremes. They went from the Supremes to Diana Ross and the Supremes. They continually broke up different groups and individuals, and they push out one person in this type of messiah type of situation as though one person is doing it. One person can be able to be the cure. I did it myself with no help. No, now we're going back to during this time of COVID, during the time of us needing each other, during the time of taking that time out and realizing you're not the one. Now we're realizing that it's important for all of us to be able to work together. And we can't be divided again. We've unified. We've come together. Families have come together. So let's not go back to this sleeping, thing through the revolution, as though that you're thinking you're the one and it's only you. One of the things with Cultivating the Culture, we emphasize, it's not about me. It's not about a new leader or anything. This is about the leaders that we have out there, raising up the youth as leaders, raising up our children. And in order, a leader is not just someone that's peers. A leader is raised, and we have to raise them. They're raised by examples. They're raised them by showing the history. For example, with Martin Luther King, with Malcolm X, with Paul Robeson, with many other people, and teaching them and raising these leaders.
The world in which we live is geographically one. The challenge that we face today is to make it one in terms of brotherhood. Now, it's true that the geographical oneness of this age has come into being to a large extent through modern man's scientific ingenuity. Modern man, through his scientific genius, has been able to dwarf distance and place time in chains. And our jet planes have compressed into minutes distances that once took weeks and even months. All of this tells us that our world is a neighborhood. Through our scientific and technological genius, we have made of this world a neighborhood, and yet we have not had the ethical commitment to make of it a brotherhood.
Through our scientific and technological genius, we have made this world a neighborhood, and yet we have not the ethical commitment to make it a brotherhood. When this came out, they were doing, I guess, back mainframes. There was no such, the PC. Science was coming in. There was no computers and none of the speeds that we have now. So if he had what we had today, what would he be saying about all of the scientific and technological genius that we can be able to make this, one neighborhood? We've been able to stretch out. One of the things we showed with Malcolm, when Malcolm was bringing all of us together, or calling us Afro-Americans, and bringing Africa, together. So the Caribbean, South America, all of these places, making that one, and then extending out to Africa. So we're not just dependent on the people here that as far as for our economics, for our growth, for our world relationship. And here, that's what he's talking about. He said this scientific technology has opened up. So going back to those people that are sleeping during this revolution, we should wake up and wake up to the opportunities. Those people that end up, like you said, while we're in solitary confinement and you have a chance to be able to look and study, what are you doing? Are you watching TV? Are you watching old reruns? Or are you taking advantage of this time to be able to educate yourself? Are you taking advantage of this time to use that scientific technology to reach out across the world to find the opportunities, economic opportunities? The economic opportunities in China, the economic opportunities in Africa, economic opportunities in other places. So you can be able to get resources to be able to bring them here. So when these challenges come, we can be able to deal with it. Or are we just sleeping, waiting to be second-class citizens when this is over again?
But somehow and in some way we've got to do this. We must all learn to live together as brothers. We will all perish together as fools. We are tied together in the single garment of destiny, caught in an inescapable network of mutuality. Whatever affects one directly affects all indirectly. For some strange reason, I can never be what I ought to be until you are what you ought to be, and you can never be what you ought to be until I am what I ought to be.
What a beautiful statement for us. You know, this is what we have to realize. Like I said, this individual thing, you know, people saying I don't have an obligation, I don't owe anybody anything. Yeah, like you said, we are tied together in a single garment. And this is talking about, he's talking to the world, but he's talking to us, talking to our people. And this is where we are right now. We have to listen to these words. And this solution that he gave for the racism in the society and what was going on and the ills of there for 50 years ago is the same thing for today. But we have to be able to listen to these words and relate it to today. We have to understand that we are tied together in a single garment of destiny. We are caught in an inescapable network of mutuality. And whatever affects one directly one directly affects all indirectly. As he said, for some strange reason, I can never be what I ought to be until you are what you ought to be. And you need to understand that. I can't be who I ought to be until you are who you ought to be. It's not about me, it's about us. I put in my work, you have to put in your work. We can all be able to make that change. And he said, this is the way God's universe is made. This is the way of the structure. Beautiful.
This is the way God's universe is made. This is the way it is structured. John Donne caught it years ago and placed it in graphic terms. No man is an island entire of itself. Every man is a piece of the continent, a part of the main. And he goes on toward the end to say, any man's death diminishes me because I am involved in mankind. Therefore never send to know for whom the bell tolls. It tolls for thee. We must see this, believe this, and live by it.
We must see this, believe this, and live by it if we are to remain awoke through a great revolution. This is the solution. This is the solution for now. It was for then, it's for now. We must see what is necessary. We must believe in what is necessary. And we must live by it. Not just speak it. Freedom of speech, anybody can say what they want to. But what are they doing? Do they see it? Do they believe in it? Do they live by it? And if we to remain awoke, and we have to remain awoke during this revolution. Because like I said, just like I told everybody before, once the sports came back in, everybody go back to sleep and having fun and going back to not studying, not being able to put themselves in a better position, not talking to their family, not developing, because you have to be able to develop your family first. You have to develop your community. Then you can develop your nation. Then you can work on the rest. But if you're not doing that, taking that time out, then you will be caught up in this situation.
We are to remain awake through a great revolution. Secondly, we are challenged to eradicate last vestiges of racial injustice from our nation. I must say this morning that racial injustice is still the black man's burden and the white man's shame.
52 years later, racial injustice is still the black man's burden and the white man's shame. Why has not things changed? There was a revolution then. But what happened? We went to sleep. You look at King was killed in 68. 78, what was going on? 72, what was going on? We had rioting. We had, people started the heroin got strong. Then they started, with their big propagation machine. The biggest propagator of supremacy is the media, the movies, these type of imagery. So we went from this type of speaking, this type of action, these type of people to disco frisco and all other good stuff, all bad stuff. And then the rap came in, and the rap still started out, and then it got commercialized and changed it. And then here we are today going through the same thing. And what this man is saying from 52 years ago is so relevant today. We have to go back and listen to the speeches of our leaders of the past, because the problem of the past is still present today. So the solution for today was given by our leaders of the past.
It is an unhappy truth that racism is a way of life for the vast majority of white Americans, spoken and unspoken, acknowledged and denied, subtle, sometimes not so subtle. The disease of racism permeates and poisons a whole body politic.
Now, like I said, when I started out with MLK or Dr. Martin Luther King, they're constantly, these people have shown, I have a dream. I have a dream. Little black boys and little white girls holding hands, this type of situation. And this is what they say. This is what they push of this man. And this is a week before this man died. And he said, it is an unhappy truth that racism is a way of life for the vast majority of white Americans, spoken and unspoken. Spoken and unspoken. The unspoken part was 75 million people voting for Donald Trump, even though they knew all of the things that he did before. It is unhappy truth that racism is a way of life for the vast majority of white Americans, spoken and unspoken, acknowledged and denied. Subtle and sometimes not subtle, the disease of racism permeates and poisons a whole body politic. 52 years later, still the same? We need some change. We need to not sleep through this revolution. And we need to not let those that's been sleeping take it over when things get back in motion.
And I can see nothing more urgent than for America to work passionately and unrelentingly to get rid of the disease of racism. Something positive must be done. Everyone must share in the guilt, as individuals and as institutions. The government must certainly share the guilt. Individuals must share the guilt. Even the church must share the guilt. We must face the sad fact at 11 o'clock on Sunday morning when we stand to sing, "In Christ there is no east nor west." We stand in the most segregated hour of America. The hour has come for everybody, and for all institutions, for the public sector and the private sector to work to get rid of racism. Now, if we're to do it, we must honestly admit certain things and get rid of certain myths that have constantly been disseminated all over our nation. One is the myth of time. It is a notion that only...
I'm going to pause on that. He said the hour has come for everybody, all institutions of the public sector and the private sector, to work to get rid of racism. So this is what King was saying. It's not just going to take the government. It's going to take everybody. It's going to take the public and the private. And we have to hold public and private accountable to be able to get rid of this. And now he's dealing with the myths. Beautiful part.
Time can solve the problem of racial injustice. And there are those who often sincerely say to the Negro and his allies in the white community, why don't you slow up? Stop pushing things so fast. Only time can solve the problem. And if you will just be nice and patient and continue to pray, in 100 or 200 years, the problem will work itself out.
And I'm going to pause on that, because the way that they've painted the picture of my brother, the way they've painted the picture of King, as though we shall overcome. This is it. Let's just let time, let's peace. And this is how they've always shown it, to make people feel and speak a certain way. But this is what this man was saying. This is a myth. This is not going to make the change. Not just time. People will change. We shall overcome. Only if we move forward with an action.
Well, that is an answer to that myth. It is that time is neutral. It can be used either constructively or destructively. And I'm sorry to say this morning that I'm absolutely convinced that the forces of ill will in our nation, the extreme rightists of our nation, the people on the wrong side, have used time much more effectively than the forces of goodwill.
This is very, very critical. Very critical. And this is what many people do, waste time. I would tell brothers when they got locked up and get 20 years, 10 years, I say, you can take back your time. And say, take back your time by being productive. Take back your time while you're 10 years, study something, memorize something, gain a skill. So when you leave here, when you're changed, you've utilized, you've done something with it. And as he said the answer of this myth is that time is neutral. Time will pass by. But if nothing's being done, you're still sleeping, what change is going to happen? So many people are sleeping through this revolution when most of these people, most of us, all of us have to be involved. Because why? Time is neutral. Nothing's going to happen if you just let that time go by and you're not doing anything. He said it can be used either constructively or destructively. Constructively or destructively. So constructively would be educating yourself, trying to put yourself in a position. Destructively is wasting your time watching TV, watching these dumb shows, listening to rap, listening to all these things, and nothing progressing yourself, talking about something that's not going to produce. And many people just waste their time. And he said, I'm sorry to say this morning that I'm absolutely convinced that the forces of ill will in our nation, the extreme rightists of our nation, the people on the wrong side, have used time much more effectively than the forces of goodwill. Yes, they're always working, constantly working, never stopping to trying to defeat you, to defeat us. Are we constantly working to win, to be able to protect, to be able to take advantage, to be constructively taking advantage of their time? Like you said, do not sleep through this revolution. Do not be of those. Take advantage of your time. Wake up.
It may well be that we will have to repent in this generation, not merely for the vitriolic words and the violent actions of the bad people, but for the appalling silence and indifference of the good people who sit around and say, wait on time. Somewhere we must come to see that human progress never rolls in on the wheels of inevitability. It comes through the tireless efforts and the persistent work of dedicated individuals who are willing to be co-workers with God.
He said, somewhere we must come to see that human progress never rolls in on the wheels of inevitability. It's not just going to happen. It comes through the tireless efforts and the persistent work of dedicated individuals who are willing to be co-workers with God. So he's giving you a solution. He's given us a solution 50 years ago, and it's the same thing today. We want change. When are we going to get off this thing to thinking that someone that is going to stop doing what they're going to do? Things are going to change. Oh, they're going to change. They're going to stop doing what they're going to do. No, you have to be able to put that work in. It takes us all. Not one person, not a Messiah, not a leader. It takes you. It takes all of us. He said it comes through the tireless efforts and the persistent work of dedicated individuals who are willing to be co-workers with God. You can't leave the Lord alone. You can't leave the creator of existence alone.
Without this hard work, time itself becomes an ally of the primitive forces of social stagnation. So we must help time and realize that the time is always right to do right. Now that is another myth that still gets around. It is a kind of over-reliance on the bootstrap philosophy. And there are those who still feel that if the Negro is to rise out of poverty, if the Negro is to rise out of slum conditions, if he is to rise out of discrimination and segregation, he must do it all by himself. And so they say, the Negro must lift himself by his own bootstraps. They never stop to realize that no other ethnic group has been a slave on American soil. The people who say this never stop to realize that the nation made the black man's color a stigma.
Yep.
But beyond this, they never stop to realize the debt that they owe a people who were kept in slavery 244 years. In 1863, the Negro was told that he was free as a result of the Emancipation Proclamation being signed by Abraham Lincoln. But he was not given any land to make that freedom meaningful. It was something like keeping a person in prison for a number of years and suddenly discovering that that person is not guilty of the crime for which he was convicted. And you just go up to him and say, now you're free. But you don't give him any bus fare to get to town. You don't give him any money to get some clothes to put on his back or to get on his feet again in life. Every code of jurisprudence would rise up against this. And yet this is the very thing that our nation did to the black man. It simply said you're free, and it left him there penniless, illiterate, not knowing what to do. And the irony of it all is that at the same time the nation failed to do anything for the black man, through an act of Congress, it was giving away millions of acres of land in the West and the Midwest, which meant that it was willing to undergird its white peasants from Europe with an economic floor. But not only did it give the land.
Many people don't know that. Many people don't understand. The same exact time, while we got our freedom, so-called, like he said, an irony of it is that at the same time the nation failed to do anything for the black man, give us any land, anything. They just let us free. Through an act of Congress was giving away millions of acres of land in the West and the Midwest. And you go in the Midwest and you go to these places, you just see land. I drove all the way to California, and you see all this land all over, in the Midwest. You see, and these people, the last name Kowalski and other names, These are the Europeans. These are the descendants of the Europeans. And they farmed their land. We would have loved to have all that land, to be able to, after our freedom. We've been here, like you said, over 200 years. But you're getting people from other places. They're giving it away. So they understood the importance of it. They wanted to be able to have people to cultivate the land. And we were farmers. So there was opportunity to be able to give us that land so we can be able to develop. We can be able to grow. And then he said these same people are the ones that are saying, hey, look, I came from Europe and look at me now.
It built land-grant colleges to teach them how to farm. Not only that, it provided county agents to further their expertise in farming. Not only that, as the years unfolded, it provided low interest rates so that they could mechanize our farms. And to this day, thousands of these very persons are receiving millions of dollars in federal subsidies every year not to farm. And these are so often the very people who tell Negroes that they must lift themselves by their own bootstraps. It's all right to tell a man to lift himself by his own bootstraps, but it is a cruel jest to say to a bootless man that he ought to lift himself by his own bootstraps. We must come to see that the roots of racism are very deep in our country. And there must be something positive and massive in order to get rid of all of the effects of racism and the tragedies of racial injustice. Now that is another thing.
So we'll continue next week with the second part and also his last speech that he had when he went to Memphis. But and he said this last one, we must come to see the roots of racism are very deep in our country. And there must be something positive and massive in order to get rid of all the effects of racism and the tragedies of racial injustice. And we are here 52 years later. 52 years later, and we're still going through the same thing. This, if you look at this document, you look at this, you listen to it. I actually printed out the actual transcript of it. You can get the transcript. Like I said, we have technology. You can get the information. You get the transcript. Take it, make a copy of it, and break it down. And he lays out a plan of different steps, the things that we can do. If you were to go back and you pull up, like I said, W. Du Bois, Paul Robeson, various individuals, Malcolm X, and you look at the solutions that these people had to deal with a problem, racism has not changed. So it's a disease, as he talks about it. He said the disease of racism. This is the same way. So with this disease, here it is. Somebody has a disease. They're using penicillin for that same disease 50 years later, 70 years later. Why? Because it works. So if they can come up with a cure for that disease from 70 years ago, 80 years ago, then the disease of racism, whatever we came up and we were able to overcome it, we need to be able to study what they said before. We need to be able to bring it forth and implement it in this day to be able to listen to it. But are we going to wait to Martin Luther King's birthday every year and listen to the part that they give us? I have a dream. I seen over the mountaintop. That statement. Or we're going to listen to the whole plan. This man was at a cathedral speaking. He was giving a sermon, but he was not just giving a sermon. He was talking about God. He was talking from a point about belief. And this is where we have to come through. We have to come back to it. If we look at it, this attack that they have through entertainment, they've had us, work away from our belief or work away from the requirements and the responsibilities that having belief or some faith, whether you follow the Torah, whether you follow the Injil or the New Testament, whether you follow the Quran, these books are books of guidance that will cause this change in your life and also protect us from the traps that we have of our society. The things that we keep saying that they do this, they do that, are all things that are traps. But if we lived our life right, it would be very ineffective. Yes, some things will work to a certain extent. Some things we can avoid, some things we can't. But what happens is these things will be greatly reduced. And then, as he said, it takes us to be active. It takes us to be able to get involved and start studying the laws, start being able to volunteer and help in these prisons, help in the juvenile facilities, help working with these youth and educating them, help educating children, volunteering, taking that time out instead of just being entertained. And entertainers are good, but a person is an entertainer. That's their job. You know, you're great. Nice to watch you act, right? Entertain somebody, but that's what it is. Life is, our success is not about being entertained. Martin Luther King is not an entertainer. Malcolm X is not an entertainer. Other people were entertainers and they did their job, but the reality is going to take more than that. It's going to take all of us. It's going to take us to be involved. It's going to take us to get out there. So I know we started our show late because of the technical difficulties. God willing, inshallah, we won't have those issues next week. We'll continue with Malcolm, and we're coming into this month that they've given us, so-called Black History Month. And so during this month, we're going to we're going to listen to different speeches or even read some excerpts from different books from the leaders of the past and focus on that instead of just talking about the person, instead of talking about this person and what they did. Let's look at that person and what was their solution to this age-old disease of racism. How did they accomplish the things that they had, from being owned like a dog in the 1863 before that, to being free, to being by the turn of the century, having, the all of this land and having businesses and having these other things and making these changes, taking advantage of the right to vote during that time. How were they able to achieve all of that? What were they able to do? Let's study those people. And they were dealing with a more racist society than we are. The reason why it may be hard now is because we basically laid down and said, gone back into a state of allowing somebody to be a master, tell me how to think, tell me what to do. I'm going to be on your system, and that's the only way that I'm going to make money. Instead of reaching out, like you said, to that international brotherhood and taking advantage of the technological advances that we have to be able to expand and not be dependent on somebody who has not changed, and that's not their responsibility, to be able to take care of us. We have to take care of ourselves. So, cultivating the culture. I hope the show was able to benefit you. God willing, inshallah, next week we can continue with Brother, Martin. And thank you very much. Peace be with you. Assalamu alaikum.